Well, to talk through those parliamentary peculiarities, I'm delighted to be joined now by Michael Fabricant, of course, the Conservative MP for Lichfield. Welcome to the programme, Michael. Now, you've served in the House of Commons with Owen Paterson for a long time. What are your thoughts initially on this breaking news that he is no longer an MP?
Well, it is very sad, and I feel very sorry for him for the way the circumstances played out. And of course, the last 48 hours have appeared, I think, to the general public to be rather chaotic. And the press has sort of gathered together and started saying it's all a U-turn. But in fact, I don't know whether you want to discuss it now, Tom, but I think one of the things that it's worth doing is just looking at the genesis of how this all happened over the last month or so and how we got into this position.
Well, what was that genesis? Because I understand that many MPs feel that the system of standards is broken, that there isn't a proper right for appeal, that it's too lax on many members, that it's too harsh on some members. Clearly, there's a general sense of frustration around this system. Indeed, another of your former colleagues, Rob Roberts, the MP for Delyn, seemed to have been let off with a slap on the wrist for being accused of very unsavoury things. Clearly, something needed to change, but understandably, people look at this case, look at the specifics of it being attached to one MP, look at how it was retrospective and think that is not on.
Well, let's indeed look at the genesis. So about 3 weeks ago, The Telegraph started a campaign with the very respected journalist Charles Moore talking about all the problems with the way the whole inquiry was conducted. And it was flawed. I mean, first of all, the system is flawed. You've got one person who is judge and jury and a committee who then rubber stamps that person's decision with no right of appeal. What happened in this case was you had, first of all, that person, the Commissioner for Standards, saying before the inquiry even began that she thought Owen Paterson was guilty. And incidentally, I'm not making any judgment at all and never have done whether he's guilty or not. But, you know, she starts off by saying that in a court of law, if a judge had done that, he would have been removed from the case, possibly struck off as a judge. Nevertheless, she did it. Then the report contained a whole series of factual inaccuracies, and 17 witnesses who wanted to appear and give evidence were forbidden from doing so. They had to do bits in writing, which meant there was no cross-examination. So the whole system was botched. And I wrote to the Deputy Chief Whip, I WhatsApped him, the Deputy Chief Whip last Saturday to say, look, I've just seen the motion laid by the government, which basically said that we're going to suspend Owen Paterson for 30 days. And I said, look, I don't know the rights or wrongs of the case, but the way the whole thing has been organised has been terrible. And I can't vote for this. I probably would have just abstained, actually, because I didn't know what was going to happen. Then the next thing that happened was that Andrea Leadsom, very helpfully, I thought, put down a motion which said, come on, let's look at the whole system because it's broke. And you know what occurs to me is MPs seem to be very good, or they think they're very good, at legislating for everybody else. But when it comes to setting up a system for themselves, they're pretty useless, I think. So that's why I voted, and I was very happy to vote for Andrea Leadsom's amendment. And what would that have done? That would have set up a select committee, and there are lots of select committees in the House of Commons, a select committee which would have looked at how these inquiries should be conducted in future. And in the meantime, just temporarily held over on the decision to punish Owen Paterson. And it was just a temporary halt, not,
although many
letting him off the hook.
Exactly the
Sorry, were you coming in, Tom?
You understand that many MPs have gone through the same system, and to retrospectively change that system does look wrong, especially when the argument that Jacob Rees-Mogg made to the House of Commons with regard to Rob Roberts, the Conservative MP, or the former Conservative MP for Delyn, who has now lost the whip over claims of sexual harassment. The Conservative Party said they couldn't change the rules retrospectively to allow the constituents of Delyn to have a by-election. And yet very happily supported an amendment to retrospectively change the rules with regard to Owen Paterson. Do you see a double standard there?
Well, I understand why people feel that. I think it is because, as I've already explained, it was such a botched inquiry. You really can't have the commissioner saying in advance the guy is guilty before she's even done the inquiry. And then to have factual errors in the report and not even take witnesses. I mean, that really was, to quote actually Jacob Rees-Mogg, that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I have no doubt, to the general public, it looks dreadful. But, justice should be done, and it has to be seen to be done. And certainly that particular inquiry, I don't think justice was done at all. And as I say, I'm not defending Owen Paterson. I'm not saying whether he's guilty or innocent. What I am saying is that the inquiry was an absolute botch. And to be frank, I think the commissioner in this instance should be ashamed of herself.
And yet the way that the government handled this all, and the U-turn and the escalation, all of the front pages, this has turned it into a much bigger story than it needed to be, and potentially has overshadowed the other big story where Parliament has not covered itself in glory this week. Of course, the former Labour MP Claudia Webb being sentenced. Of course, she threatened to throw acid over a woman, a court heard that she threatened to send indecent pictures of a woman to that woman's children. And yet this isn't on the front pages. Instead, we're talking about Owen Paterson. Has the government royally messed this up?
Well, I think with hindsight, yes. But, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Because if the opposition parties hadn't said, right, we're not going to take part in this select committee, which Parliament has now passed, if they hadn't said that, we would have gone ahead and had the select committee. Now, I think because of the resignation of Owen Paterson, and I think what probably happened was the chief whip said, look, we gave it our best shot, not to get you off, but to have a proper restructuring of the way these inquiries are done. But because now the opposition parties are not cooperating, we can't do anything else. I wouldn't even call it a U-turn, actually. I think, it's like a battle. You have a course of events, and all you can do at the end of the day is react to events. It's like a battle, it's like business, it's like everything else. So with the opposition parties saying they wouldn't take part in the select committee, we really had no choice but to say, look, there isn't going to be a select committee. Owen, the situation is now becoming impossible. So, as I say, Owen Paterson has now decided to resign. And as you quite rightly say, he's done this archaic, wonderful British practice of taking on a crown position. And when you take on a crown position, you can no longer be a member of Parliament. So that's how he has now resigned in a practical way.
Well, Michael Fabricant, thank you so much for taking us through all of those intricacies of the British parliamentary system, and indeed explaining a little bit more about what went on with this standards report. Really appreciate your time here this morning on the briefing on GB News. Well,